Hi, it's James. Thanks for joining me on the Inversiverse. In episode 2, we began to understand how we as individuals can be imprinted upon through external sources. We began to conceptualize ourselves as blank slates, living with free will. We learned that nature and nurture plays a key role in the development of our behaviour and our social traits. In episode 3 of the Inversiverse, we're going to explore how we could be subject to biases which could cloud our judgment, rational thought. What is brainwashing? Is there evidence of substantiated claim for the misuse of psychological techniques to imprint upon individuals' behaviour through the media, written press, and or through other individuals as influencers? In The Matrix, the writers refer to these people as operatives, and we're going to explore what is conditioning and how the environment plays a key role in shaping who we are as people. First off, I'm going to discuss and introduce to you mental constructs and how they play a key role in our lives and shape our realities internally and externally. A mental construct is an idea, concept or model that is created in the mind. Mental constructs help us explain or categorize complex phenomena or abstract concepts discussed in episode 2. We're unable to directly observe these constructs in our mind, but they help us to make sense of our experiences. For example, theory of mind. The theory conceptualizes the cognitive ability to understand another's mind. Since the original proposal, a great deal of research has been carried out in neuroscience and neurorobotics that have expanded on the concept proposed by Premack and Woodruff in 1978. And now proposals are being hypothesized that areas of our brains function cognitively similar to that of a computer, as imaged. It highlights the region of the brain, MPFC, which is the prefrontal cortex, that would, in a computational model, be responsible for storing beliefs. Additional examples of mental constructs we are more familiar with include intelligence, self-esteem, and social norms. Examples of social constructs pictured include nationality, countries, and money. These are constructs we agree to by consensus, but they are not absolute and can be renegotiated. Psychological constructs are intangible things that are distinct from others. Examples are our thought process, expanded potentially to worry, rumination, and imaging. Emotional examples expand to excitement, surprise, or gift, or any other emotion. You may find this presentation surprising and be excited to learn more, because it's a feeling we can only imagine the level of surprise or excitement. Unless expressed, it is unseen by others or myself. Now that we understand mental constructs, I can introduce to you the topic of a bias. There are a number of biases as mental constructs we as a society have identified through research in psychology and through philosophical wisdom. Common biases include confirmation bias, availability heuristics, anchoring bias, and halo and horns. There are so many biases, there are too many to list to highlight in this presentation, so I encourage you to do some research of your own to understand fully what they are and how they may or may not affect you in your daily life as mental constructs. Biases are defined as cognitive shortcuts or tendencies that can directly influence how we perceive, interpret, and respond to information available to us through our perceptual experience of the conscious and subconscious mind. Biases are defined as mental concepts because they are not directly observable, but they are inferred from behaviour and decision-making patterns and processes. Because they are unseen, it leaves us mentally open to being potentially manipulated, or situations could occur where you're being blinded physically and mentally to the actual truth of a situation. There are too many biases to list in this presentation. There are potentially hundreds categorized and classified as our knowledge and understanding deepens in cognitive behaviors and influences. The most well-known are placed into categories, and these are known as cognitive biases, social, memory, decision-making, perception, and motivational biases. The images depict examples of what may cause us mental biases in individuals in everyday life: gender bias, ageism, horn effect, halo effect, the availability heuristic. If an individual is introduced to a new piece of information, their decision-making and behaviour patterns may reflect on how they feel about that, and this may trigger a fast, automatic response, leaving them, therefore, closed off to new information. However, if they took the time to rationally think and consider what information is being presented to them, they may realise that the information is in fact not a conspiracy and is an actual valid, true piece of information. The information we receive through our conscious and subconscious minds and perceptions is open to conditioning. An already existing bias may be imparted by the individual conveying the information. Conditioning is a learning process in which an organism, animal, or person's behaviour becomes dependent on the occurrence of stimulation in its environment. Thanks to Ivan Pavlov, a Russian psychologist, and his research, we can define conditioning into the following forms: classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Key components of each form of conditioning are pictured. Classical conditioning, also known as Pavlovian or respondent conditioning involves learning through association, an initial neutral stimulus with a stimulus that naturally and automatically elicits a response as time passes. The neutral stimulus alone can then elicit the same automatic response. This conditioning can technically be defined as a state of being trained. Pictured as a breakdown of Pavlov's dog experiment. Many are familiar with how to train a dog. This can also be used with any organism, animal, or person. If abused, I will elaborate further on this in the next episode of the Inversiverse to conclude. The key components are unconditional stimulus, a stimulus that naturally and automatically triggers a response without prior learning, e.g. food causing salivation in a dog. Unconditional response, the unlearned response that occurs naturally in reaction to the unconditional stimulus, salivation in response to food. Conditional stimulus, a previously neutral stimulus that, after being paired with the unconditional stimulus, eventually triggers a conditioned response. The sound of the bell is paired with food. The conditional response, the learned response to the previously neutral response, e.g. salivation in response to the sound of the bell. Through this method detailed in the picture, Pavlov trained the dog through association to the bell to elicit response. This was and is achieved through conscious brain activity becoming a subconscious automatic response over time, a form of behaviour program, stroke manipulation, an alternative explanation perspective to consider for the word train and to be trained. A habit was formed by the dog without it consciously realising. It had become accustomed to be ready for food when the bell rang. Hopefully the dog received a treat, otherwise it could be used immorally and could harm the dog if cruelly abused. The dog would technically be confused if a treat wasn't given one time, and if the stimulus isn't satisfied, it could become angry and frustrated. The confusion between the conscious part of the brain and subconscious part of the brain is known as cognitive dissonance. The second form of conditioning is known to us as operant instrumental conditioning. This was introduced and pioneered in theory by B.F. Skinner, 1938. It involves learning to associate behaviour with its consequences, which can either reinforce or reward or punish the behaviour as a result of actions and choices. Let's take a deeper look at the operant/instrumental form of conditioning, which will lead us to conclusion in the final topic of this presentation, the environment and how that plays a role in the influence and manipulation of behaviour. The rat is contained within the Skinner box. This is its habitat, living environment. It's a closed-off system, effectively. The food is dispensed by the pressing of the button. The programming of the dispenser/instrument could be for every 10 presses, a reward is dispensed with each press. This gives the rat comfort and stability in its living environment, so it continues to press because psychologically it reinforces its basic needs to survive. But upon monitoring the rat over time, it began to get fat, less active and lethargic because it's comfortable and not having to apply itself to sustain its needs. The experiment is adjusted to influence the rat's behaviour from the 10th press onwards. As an example, the electric grid is activated and it shocks the rat as punishment. This would initially leave the rat confused, but its behaviour and need to press would continue. But by the 20th electric shock as a punishment, the rat had lost weight and become fearful of its living environment. It would not touch the button again, therefore adjusting and reinforcing its behaviour through punitive actions over time. How do we define an environment? An environment is everything external to an organism, individual or animal that can influence their life and activities. Within the definition as pictured, we include natural, human-made synthetic surroundings, social and cultural factors, economic and political conditions. The environment and environmental impacts play a key role in our everyday lives and can play a significant role in our mental health and self-awareness, and if not understood, can influence our behaviour consciously and or subconsciously. This may leave us in a position of weakness and vulnerability, and if exploited by insincere manipulative individuals, organisations or governments, as shown through the demonstration of the operant instrumental conditioning by Skinner's experiment, for a period of time the rat was happy until operant changed. It must not have been much fun for it to be electrocuted in the second part of the experiment when all it wanted was to satisfy its basic living needs within the environment and eat. So let's conclude what has been covered in this episode of the Inversiverse. We've covered mental constructs, what they are, and the roles they play in our internal and external worlds, how our internal world could be affected by external and internal mental biases, how each of these factors can influence our behaviour and decision-making through the phenomenon known as conditioning, as demonstrated by Pavlov and Skinner, and how the environment we live in plays a significant factor to our inner worlds, how our worlds can be influenced by nasty and evil manipulative individuals. In the next episode, I'm going to present and hypothesize to you a working example of how we could be exploited through everything covered in the previous episodes without us realizing we're being manipulated, indoctrinated, gaslighted, or brainwashed. So please join me again. If you have found these episodes informative and helpful, please like and share. Bye for now, James.